Hi guys! So today's lesson is going to be for Friday, March 20th. We made it through our first week. Good job. Pat yourself on the back for that. This was very difficult and you did it. I'm proud of you. Nice job. If any of you guys have questions, I feel like I need to say this again. Don't forget to use the discussion board or email me, whatever it is. If you want to say, hey, use the discussion board, that's fine. I'm constantly checking it. So that's what that's for. We're getting done. We're getting closer to the end of the war. Actually, today is the last day for World War II notes. It took us a very long time, but we're finally here. Let's get this war over with. So today, for Friday, March 20th, you have a bell ringer, and the bell ringer is what was VJ Day, what events happened that led to this day, what did the world learn about nuclear weapons, and then if you watched the documentary on the Hiroshima, which was the greatest events of World War II in color. If you watched that, that last question is for you. What did you learn? What was some interesting facts about that? If you watched it. If you didn't watch it or could not watch it, then don't answer that question. That's okay. So after you've answered your bell ringer, we are doing slides 54 and 55, and those are the last two slides. That is it. And guys, it's the end of the war, and I knew that we were going to be talking about it, so guess what? I wore my Franklin Roosevelt shirt from his museum. Look at that. Franklin D. Roosevelt. On the back, it says a lot. You can see on the back. There's a ton of stuff that he implemented. It says something like, this is a Franklin Roosevelt world. I don't want any dictatorship jokes. I don't want them. I can't take them. Again, I don't want them. But it just says all the things that he's implemented that have helped us through life. So it's on the back. It's a lot, okay? Trust me. Anyway, so our last two slides, we have 54. It is titled Results of the War. The previous slides were, again, I'm looking at my iPad. The previous slides were on the atomic bomb, and we looked at the devastation. I read some excerpts from the book Hiroshima, the primary source book that was written by somebody that was there. So then we looked at the pictures. VJ Day, that's victory in Japan, done. We have won in Europe and in Japan. So results of the war. June 1945, we have 50 countries meeting together to come up with a plan yet again to prevent something like this war from ever happening ever again. Sounds great. Sounds familiar. We've talked about this before. You should be thinking about the League of Nations after World War I. And Woodrow Wilson and the Big Four that time met and were like, we can't have this ever happen again. And so they created the League of Nations, but by the time Wilson got back to the States, Congress wouldn't join. So it failed, and it was incredibly weak, and it didn't have any authority whatsoever. So 50 countries are going to meet in San Francisco, California, and they're going to create what's called the United Nations, the UN, which is a world government. It is a global government meant to prevent wars from occurring. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but they are meeting currently, to handle this epidemic or this pandemic because it's all over the world. So that's the kind of issues that the United Nations handles. Next, we have the Potsdam Conference, and that word should look familiar, not only from last year in American history, but from the documentaries that we watched in class. There was a couple German historians that were speaking in the documentaries, and one of them is a professor at Potsdam, or in Potsdam, because it's a city. So that should also look familiar for you all. So they met in Potsdam, Germany. How do you differentiate this and the Potsdam Conference and the Yalta Conference? Well, Potsdam, if you switch the T and the S, it's post. So that's the war is over with. At Yalta, they met during the war, but the war is done by the time the Potsdam Conference occurs. We've taken Europe, and we have VE Day and VJ Day with Japan. So Potsdam post conference. So there was a big concern. This is the second bullet point under Potsdam Conference, that communism and the Soviet influence would spread throughout Europe. Remember at the Yalta Conference, Joseph Stalin promised that he wouldn't spread his communistic beliefs and take over like the dictator that he is, and he also promised fair and free elections, which we know is not even a phrase that happens in Russia at all. So he's gonna lie. He lied, and Truman knows this. He can sense that Stalin is not going to keep his promises. So by the time that they meet at the Potsdam Conference, Truman had hoped that if he met with Stalin face to face, he could get the leader to live up to his promises at Yalta, and he couldn't. He couldn't. Stalin knew what he was doing. He had his fingers crossed behind his back for everything, and he understood that he could say these things, but he didn't have to follow through with them. So he was being very shisty. So that actually, that's going to lead to the Cold War. You missed that. I had to bring it back. We're about to enter the Cold War, you guys. Like, that's exciting. If we have that to look forward to, right? Yes, the answer is yes. It's the Cold War. It's very sad, but like, I'm excited about it. So it's okay. So yeah, the tensions between Stalin and the fact that he's lying at all these conferences is going to lead to the Cold War. I love it. Okay, back into the slides here. So sorry. The conflicts between us and Japan are not just going to be over with by the time like we make it in there and be like, hey, we're the allies and we're here to make you surrender. We've dropped 2 atomic bombs on 2 cities in Japan, and that's not going to fix things whatsoever. It's actually gonna, it's gonna make them angry. Yeah, they're gonna surrender, but that doesn't mean they're gonna be friends with us, and we want them to be friends with us. So we institute a democracy, and we send Douglas MacArthur to Japan, and he's going to help them write a new constitution. And because he's from the United States, and because it's all he has to go off of, he's going to help them institute democratic ideals in their constitution. So this is democratic peace. This is what we do best. When countries aren't doing something that we want them to do, when countries aren't listening to us, when they are scaring us, or when they are our enemy, we try to force them into a democracy. When we took over these territories, we tried to institute democracies in those territories, because that democratic peace theory, if you are a democracy, then we won't fight you. So that's what we do in Japan. If you recall, Japan is an empire, and they have an emperor. So they end up creating a constitution with democratic ideals, and that makes us more comfortable with leaving after the war, because we have to fix these things. We can't just like plop a Band-Aid on World War II and say, well, it's over. We have to fix this. The world has gone through a terrible thing. We had the Holocaust. What we need to do something to heal these wounds. And so we create a democratic system in Japan so we can be friends with them. Once we've done that, that's great, right? I actually commend Japan so much for, forgiving us. I'm not like trying to act like a child and hold grudges or anything, but I mean, we dropped 2 atomic bombs on them. And then we hopped into their country and we're like, yeah, this is going to be your government now. And we helped them create a government, forced them create a government. Like that's really intense. And we are friends with them today in 2020. We're friends with them. And I mean, that's great, but we dropped 2 atomic bombs on them. I don't know. I'm not the leader. I don't know. So democratic peace in Japan to make sure that we don't go to war with them and that we can be friends with them after the war. I also have stuff on there about the war crimes. So remember the Nuremberg trials with the Nazis. Japan's part of the Axis powers, so we cannot let those war crimes go unnoticed. So even Hideki Chojo, which was the leader at the time, and 7 key figures of the Japanese military were tried and executed for their crimes during World War II. So a lot's going on. We have a lot of fixing to do. As soon as World War II ends, we are going to enter this Cold War with the Soviet Union. There's so much to focus on. Communism, fixing countries that were almost completely destroyed. I mean, there's rubble. People's emotional trauma, the economic systems, their government, their political systems, everything needs fixing. And people need help. So that's why the United Nations is going to play a key role in fixing those things, but that's not going to stop us from being scared of communism or what Stalin's going to do. So we have our eyes directly on the Soviet Union. You know, we're trying to fix Japan, we're trying to fix Europe, and Italy and all of that, which was they were our enemies during World War II. But now we are directly facing the Soviet Union. That's our biggest threat right now, because Truman has realized that Stalin's not going to listen. We've had the Yalta Conference, the war's over, we have the Potsdam Conference, and he's going to invade and take territory that used to be Nazi occupied. He's going to take those satellite states and make them a part of the Soviet Union and institute communism. And this is the Cold War. And there's a lot. There's a lot that's going to go on. There's going to be weapons, because everyone's like, oh, the United States use their nuclear weapons. Maybe we should build some and threaten other countries with them as well. So there were so many unintended consequences with that nuclear weapon and dropping those 2 atomic bombs. And now it was kind of like permission slip for other countries to be like, oh, okay, they did it, so we can too. And we're still dealing with those consequences with countries like North Korea, right? And Russia. We're constantly worried about them, or maybe that's just me, but we should be, and their nuclear weapons, right? So there's a lot. A lot came out of World War II, and the time period of the Cold War is from 1945 to 1990. So it is a long time period of just fear and tensions and not getting along. So I'm ready for it. The last slide, this is a picture of what's called the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and there are 17 goals, and every 10 years they get together, all the countries for the United Nations, they get together and they come up with a plan or these goals of what they want to accomplish by the end of those 10 years. So like the first one, for example, is no poverty. Number 2 is zero hunger. So how do we solve world hunger? You know, people talk about all the time, but the United Nations really is trying to work on that. Number 4 is quality education. 5 is gender equality. 6 is clean water. There are places in the United States that don't have clean water at all. Like they turn on their faucet and it's like brown. So we don't even, there's places in the States that don't even have that. What's another good one on here? Water, land, climate action, economic growth, infrastructure, right? So there's just all these goals that the United Nations is working on to solve by the end of those 10 years. And if they don't solve them, then they put it on the list for the next 10 years. So we're working on trying to make the world a better place. And that came out of World War II. So yeah. All right. Do your summaries for that slide. Don't forget to do your bell ringer. And we will review for the test on Monday. And then our test is on Tuesday. And get ready for the Cold War. Bye, guys.